The project of liberation is not going to be easy. When the Israelites, going back to them again, I just brought up this Passover, when the Israelites left the bosom of Egypt, it was a cradle of civilization with lots of plenty. Even though they were in captivity and used as slaves, they were fed. When they got out in the desert, they had to rely on Yahweh, I guess, to provide manna. And they, but they were close to starving. So they started belly aching and they became uncomfortable. Freedom is hard. That's why I like the Israelites. We've got to do this together. We are throwing off a massive set of powers that they're going to buckle under their own weight, and we have to be prepared to seize that moment. But part of that is first obliging people to awaken to this.
So I was trying to figure out, I feel like I know a lot about you and I know nothing. I have no idea what your background is in.
I come from a philosophy background.
That does not surprise me one bit. Yeah.
I have had a lot of detours in life. I guess my primary detour is in writing. So I wrote for a technology company for a while, a major technology and consulting firm. I taught in higher education. I have been the DC think tank, state-based think tanks for a while. And I worked for production companies, a couple of production companies. And I've been a magazine editor and a web editor. So I've run the gamut. But my favorite thing to do is basically to write and speak. And I'm a better writer than a speaker, but I realize that we're entering an era where you have to be good at both.
So there are a few things I'm tracking with what you're really interested in talking about and furthering the world, personally. It seems like your personal mission. And social, I'm trying to figure out what social evolution is to you. Social life and social engineering in a way, like designing social systems, seems very central to where your interests lie. But then there's this issue of law and morality, and not everybody who's interested in law really cares that much about morality. I think they're two different things, although I don't know that they should be different. And then there's money. And so it's like these three things are so rich and deep and can take us so many places. But I'm curious if, my sense is if you have a background in philosophy, that maybe you started somewhere specific with an interest. But the way that I gather so far, reading your Substacks and talking to you a little bit, the way your mind works, I think, is you just keep following threads, kind of like me. And if you start with one thing, it leads you to everything. There is no talking about law without ending up at money, or talking about morality even without ending up at money and law and, history. And so, I'm curious maybe just to know, where did your original, what was the entry point for you? What were you the most curious about initially?
Well, there's a lot there. So you want to, because I wanted to talk about the first thing you said, which was that I'm interested in social engineering, which is not the case at all.
Okay. Yeah.
And I want to make a very stark distinction there.
Great. I love definitions because.
Yeah. Okay. I think the main thing that I'm interested in doing is protocol design, not societal design. There's a big difference. Yeah. So in other words, what is the extent to which we can have rules without rulers? And can we subordinate rulers to rules? And how far can we take that? Because in subordinating rulers to rules, we are our own sovereigns to a very great degree. Now, of course, we want to enforce rules, and we want to protect the innocent, and sometimes that requires conflict, defense, retaliation, and so on. That is unavoidable. But that as a justification for great monopoly powers or the project of social engineering, like we're gonna figure out through so-called systems thinking the way to design society that optimizes on every human dimension, and we're going to impose that on everyone else because we are a special kind of person, a special kind of Platonic philosopher king who has all the answers about how we are to live and so on. And I'm pretty radical pluralist in this regard. I don't think we all know. There's an extent to which you can click out from that question and say, what is pluralism? And it's the idea that factually we are different from one to the next. And we have different values, and we want to self-organize into different systems that comport with our particular conceptions of the good. And that might be different from one person to the next. As long as those communities, individuals, neighbor and neighbor, or communities, community by community, are not in conflict or harming or injuring in some way, then we can subordinate those structures, those different ways of living, to a higher legal order that has different enforcement mechanisms, but doesn't prescribe what society is supposed to look like, except in the most abstract sense possible, that is the best or most expedient way to instantiate that pluralism. So if you want to live in Portland and be, and have radical redistribution of wealth and have all sorts of, polyamorous relationships and that gets instantiated into law, and there's community upbringing of children and, all manner of things, that's okay. But that's not to be something that is meant to be the one true way that is brought to scale on a national scale. So protocol design is the way I like to talk about it, is how can we think about law in a way that balances emergent law, common law, for example, laws that come out of case law, where local communities learn from the conflict and establish precedent. That's one kind of law. And then limiting statute law in a way that keeps the philosopher kings out. Philosopher kings often being legislators, keeping them out of our affairs to the greatest degree possible, except for perhaps protocol design. At the you might call it the constitutional level. So you're right. Now, now I can very quickly. How did I come into all this? Man, that's a tough question. I'd started off as an English major. After having given up on the idea of being an artist, after having been given up on the idea of being, because I was always good at the visual arts, drawing and painting and so on. After giving up on that idea, prior to that, I was hoping someday to be a writer, which that actually did come true. I thought I'd be a fiction writer, though, not a nonfiction writer. And prior to that, I thought I was going to play heavy metal because I played bass guitar in a band. And my mother disabused me of that notion and told me I had to go to college. Was very, So I did, and I was happy about it and had pretty good experiences. And then I took that circuitous path to the present that I told you about earlier. But I don't think there was ever a moment. There was never a great epiphany. I think from a personal standpoint, I had an upbringing. I had a family member that came from, I guess you could say, a tradition of guilt, manipulation, and control. And I don't want to speak ill of, dead family members now, because I love them. But that was definitely part of my upbringing. And so I think a lot of the way I have been brought up is as a reaction to guilt, manipulation, and control as a means to organize society, much less as a means to raise a child. And so I bristle at that quite a bit. And it's only up to about this year that I've actually realized that. I had a friend ask me about it, and I realized, wow, that really could be why I am who I am. Otherwise, it's been an evolution. And
I want to pause on that just for a moment, because I've seen that with myself and I've seen it with other people. I have my own version of that. And I'm thankful for it now, because it made me allergic to groupthink. Mm-hmm. Government coercion, being told what to do. And I wouldn't trade it. Like, I'm so grateful. So I'm curious if you feel similarly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we connect so readily in these conversations because that is operating in the background. And when you find each other, people like us who find each other, I think there's often a resonance there, like a kind of a personal exhalation, like, okay, I'm among my kind. Because there really are a lot of people out in the world who are content rather to be timid herds who want an ersatz parent in the corporation or the state or the corporate state, which is about the worst combination. So I suspect you feel the same way, and I think for me, when I think about those events in my life that made me bristle against guilt, manipulation, and control, it's also the case that I think I have a natural predilection to that too. So it's not just it's certainly in my nature. I was born this way, as it were. So when I started to encounter it, I bristled from the very start.
Yeah, I relate to that. Okay, so going back to, just kind of recapping. So it's not social engineering. I get that. Not creating tyrants and rulers who tell people this is the way we're going to engineer society. Protocols is interesting, I think. And maybe I would love to retrace our steps back to the previous conversation and then carry it forward again. Get in our little time machine. I'm curious what would happen if we treated this conversation like a brainstorming session between two people who think similarly and yet come from different backgrounds, and you have something to teach me and maybe I have something to teach you about what can we actually do, maybe as just me and you, I don't know, or invite other people listening to us. What is it we can actually do right now to create, whether you want to call it protocols or, I'm not opposed to the word system. I mean, because to me, when I think of it, I think of ecosystem or the human organism. I like to think in terms of organisms, living systems, basically, rather than hard systems.
Beautiful. It's the difference between a deterministic machine that someone's going to design and maintain and run,
Yeah.
and a living system that is emergent and that it changes and evolves.
Exactly. And there's no aspect of an organism that doesn't contribute to the whole or impact the whole positively, negatively. And so it's circular in that way, rather than maybe systems could have a start place and an end point, or a top down or whatever. So last time we got in our time machine and we kind of traced through the Paleolithic age and into we talked about the takers and the makers and the the agricultural age of, being less nomadic and more agrarian. And then we kind of jumped to Rome and we started talking about money and law. And that's when I, kind of jumped in and was like, wait, we got to go back to 600 BC to Ephesus. And so, maybe I'll just make a correction in this one, that in the other one, I think I mistakenly nodded my head and said, the Eleusinian mysteries is the same as the Ephesian. They're not the same. So I'm not an expert in this by any means. It's just it's my father's work. But I love his stories and what he was trying to, put out in the world where this is concerned, because the origins of money, I think, can help us understand how we got here and maybe what we could do today to create a living system that includes money, that includes morality, that includes law. So I don't know if you're thinking from the social perspective that you really like looking at, is there something historically that you would want to take us to in the time machine to look at, from a social perspective, how can we understand our nature and what got us to this point, and then how can we use that knowledge maybe to look at what we can do moving forward?
So I understood you to say that you wanted to brainstorm today and figure out what our ideals are in terms of moving the needle in the way that we share. Maybe there's overlap, maybe there's not, but it's always worth asking, right? So I would like, if you'll permit me, to ask, well, I can rocket into the future first, but I'd like to rocket into the future.
Okay.
And reverse engineer from something I'm trying to do, that I think will be a necessary step for my ideal. So that's a very complicated way of putting things, but
actually, before I actually love this so much. So, and I'm going to tell you why and give a context maybe for people listening. But also, I just want to say this out loud so the context or lens through which I'm going to listen to what you have to say. I want to try to listen to understand you. But so I work with people in pain mostly. That's my background. And it's one of the most fascinating phenomena, I think, there is on this planet, pain. Because we're talking about human beings and we can end up in pain for so many reasons, including our relationship to money, actually. But the primary thing that has allowed me to actually get results with people and move the needle in a way most people can't with them, because I'm talking about people in chronic pain, is something I call declaring a freedom to. Because most people want freedom from pain. And I would say, and the reason I'm bringing this up right now is I think that's true right now. We want freedom from our economic pain. We want freedom from government tyranny. We want freedom from whatever, fill in the blank. But all that does is give power to the thing we're fighting. And so what I heard you just say is you want to look at an ideal in the future and then reverse engineer it and come backwards, which is so perfect and beautiful, because without an ideal and something we're intentionally moving towards, we actually can't even know where we are right now, because I personally believe the present moment is informed by the past and our vision of the future, our expected future, because we're always thinking about the future. So this is great. So we're aiming at an ideal. Well, you're going to tell us what your ideal is, and then we'll kind of work backwards. So that's my context.
Yeah. So I think it's worth mentioning in broad strokes the ideal. And I'm going to sound like a jingoistic American again, but I hope that that's okay. There's this old guy named Thomas Jefferson. He was certainly a sinner, but he wrote this incredible document called the Declaration of Independence. And in that document, there's this really cool line. There's one about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that's all very good. But the one I want to draw your attention to is a line about the consent of the governed. That is in some sense my North Star. That is a future that I would like to leave my children and the children of the world. And that this is a cosmopolitan vision, not an American vision. But to the extent that American can instantiate it, or Central Americans can instantiate it, or wherever you please, the consent of the governed gets instantiated in as many places on this world as possible. Now, what that looks like is another set of really interesting conversations, but let's just say that we have the ability in some sense to opt into governance systems, to agree to their auspices, whether or not those require a lot of redistribution or a little redistribution, whether those require us to constrain our behavior in economic terms or not, constrain our behavior in social terms or personal terms or interpersonal terms. All of those levers, you could, I don't want to make society a machine again. We just got finished saying that's a bad metaphor, but just imagine the kind of activities that people can pursue alone and together. Some of those will be proscribed or restrained or restricted. And some people want to live in a community where those things are constrained or restricted in some ways. And that's okay. That gives us a lot more latitude when we consider small jurisdictions or small ways, experiments in living, that there are many more of those experiments in living, and we can gravitate to the ones that most closely comport with our conceptions of the good, yet at a meta level, we're still very much about human freedom, fundamentally. So you can't have one without the other. Otherwise, you're prescribing the one true way and trying to force it down everyone else's throat. That is the difference between us and you and I, namely you and I, and what we might call the enemy. I'm not scared to use that word. I would prefer there not be enemies, but don't try to subordinate and control me and force the one true way down my throat, because there is no one true way. And in fact, my way is probably better than theirs. So that would be the North Star. That's the ultimate goal. But I also know that my contribution to that goal probably isn't going to be of the magnitude of a Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson failed with that goal, despite the fact that we're appealing to his wisdom right now.
Can we? So, are you moving us backwards?
I'm moving us backwards in time, but still in the future.
Can we stay in the future and flesh out that ideal vision a little bit more?
If you like.
I would love to. Because I think the more specific we are, the better. And the more, so I'm maybe looking for like visuals or questions that came to mind as I was listening to you, or things like, in this ideal future, is the world then composed of people opting into kind of community governance organisms? Let's use that word.
Yes.
That suit their personal I guess, desires for the rules. Like, I like these rules, the rules of this organism, so I'm going to opt into this
organization.
Yeah, okay.
Civil association.
And so when I start to imagine that, though, I'm imagining a whole bunch of unique and different organizations across the world, probably connected digitally, but also locally. Like, maybe there are specific local ones. Maybe there are local only ones. Maybe there are local and global ones. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely.
And so in this vision, how do you imagine that all of these organizations will interact with each other, or would they? Like,
Well, they would have to. So, for example, let's imagine there are certain kinds of let's divide the world up into meat space goods and digital goods. Okay. And some of these are going to overlap, right? So it's a Venn diagram. So let's talk about lighted streets or police cruisers in the neighborhood. These are all things that some would argue, first I want to say we want to paint a picture without trying to be too prescriptive. Because at the end of the day, people are going to prove you wrong if you say this is not possible. They're going to show you how it's possible through creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. No one would have said, we can't have digital money in 2007. They would have thought you were crazy. Or they would have said, we already have digital money, it's the dollar, and, things pass through credit card networks, but it's still the dollar, right? Then Bitcoin came along and changed all that. So the idea that there's going to be experimentation and rapid adoption of successful experiments is something that we don't want to try to short circuit as part of a way that we're looking at this. But we are going to encounter problems of, how to instantiate different experiments in different contexts. So, for example, then we might say, okay, on certain kinds of in-person goods, like how the roads get built or the kinds of environmental protections in an area, how those environmental protections work. Are they a locally evolved Ostrom Commons? Are they more top-down than that? There's a lot of questions about that. So it's like, in our jurisdiction, we're gonna ascribe a subsidiarity rule, where subsidiarity is we're going to solve tasks, deal with issues, solve problems at the most local feasible level. And to the extent that it can be more localized, then it should be. And if it can't, it can be handled at a citywide level or county-wide level or a regional level and what have you. And if you start introducing other rules like rights of secession, or let's call it self-determination, that's the preferable term. Self-determination is, secession means evil Southern rednecks that, don't like people of color. Whereas self-determination are those peaceful Basques or whatever, okay, that want separatist movements that are around the world. If it's plausible that you can integrate some sort of separatism or self-determination rule and otherwise apply subsidiarity, then you start to see what is possible. You start to get these experiments. Even though they might be instantiated by local governments, it's a really pretty cheap thing to say, okay, I don't like what's going on here. I like the way this county does it. I'm going to go over one county, or I'm going to go live in this other state. So things are there. So the band of things that are possible, for example, right now, the federal government in the United States is so top heavy, and so it's just on the backs of the people in the states, which is completely at odds with what is written in the Constitution, which is why the Constitution is a completely dead letter. Let's not kid ourselves. But if we were to revive the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution, 95% of what is carried out by the federal government would be completely dismissed. And things would be handled, so many more things would be handled at the state level. You'd have 50 laboratories of experimentation. Likewise, if you pushed it down to the county level, because you have the subsidiarity rule, then you would have even more laboratories of experimentation. If you needed more scale, economies of scale, like more taxpayers, tax base or whatever, to think like a statist, that might be correct in some sense, like building interstate arterials or something like that might have to be done that way. It might not easily be done in a manner of, taking microtransactions or fees for people's uses of the roads, even though they do that all the time, every time you go to the gas tank. But we'll leave that aside. The long and short of it is there are all sorts of ways we can experiment if power devolves more locally. And of course, there are private experiments. And of course, there are things that can be done digitally now where the auspices under which you live needn't be on terra firma at all. Health insurance, for example. I'm obliged because, except for some, I use a health share arrangement, which was factored into Obamacare, ACA. But otherwise, I would have to live within the ACA system, the exchange, or I would have to use the state-based cartels. So there might be 2 or 3 different insurance companies operating in your state, and they of course cartelize. It's easy to cartelize when you're locked into a jurisdiction and people can't leave. If you live here, you have to use our product. So it's anti-competitive. Everything about the United States healthcare system is anti-competitive. You know this probably better than anyone, having seen some of your stuff. So at the end of the day, I want to maximize possibilities for experimentation while not being so doctrinaire as to say everything is going to be about privately run anarchy. But to the extent that that's possible, let's unleash it. So long as that anarchism, and I like to call this an asymptotic anarchism.
What did you say?
Asymptotic anarchism is my term for what I would call myself politically.
What does that word mean?
Yeah, an asymptote is a curve that gets that approaches a line.
Never really meets
closer, never actually reaches it, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you can imagine plotting getting closer and closer to a condition where no person coerces another or threatens violence against another, I'm trying to move asymptotically through pragmatic means and through experimentation through that process. And that's why I'm very much not about politics anymore per se, but I'm about entrepreneurship and innovation, because I think that those are much more fruitful vectors of change than politics, which is just people going to the crying their teardrop in the ocean and expecting the tide to turn, as I like to say, or opening up your smartphone and finding 2 apps, the red app and the blue app. And those are the only 2 apps available. That is a pathetic system.
Okay. So thank you for fleshing it out a little more. Mm-hmm. So if we were to move back a little bit, you said, but we're still in the future.
Yes. So what is my particular contribution to this? I feel called to something later here in my life. This was my 50th year, and I'd been noodling around with this for the last 4 or 5 years. But one of the things that I believe, when you think about this ultimate vision, you're going to have to think in terms of mutual aid associations, civil associations. And those associations are opt-in systems, much like the mutual aid societies of the 18th and 19th century. Only now we have technology. Now we have the internet. Now we have means of adjudicating across jurisdictions. You might not want to do that. You might want to have a local one, but what government has taken over, particularly with welfare and warfare, has gutted, depleted, and otherwise killed the mutual aid sector in this country.
Well, I'd love to define mutual aid societies for the people listening. I have definitions or assumptions I'm making about what you mean based on my knowledge of history, but I'd love to know exactly what you mean when you say that.
Yeah. Well, mutual aid societies were called friendly societies or fraternal societies. A lot of times they were gender or sex segregated. So men might belong to the Freemasons and women might belong to the Elks Club or what have you. But there were so many of these kind of organizations, and they were designed for people of all varying classes to look out for each other. It was really a way to come into community. And churches too. Certainly the church, for a lot of people, the synagogue and so on, was a mutual aid organization of a sort. But so also were these other secular aid organizations or hybrid organizations. They were so many of them, and they were so profound that at the time when Alexis de Tocqueville came to America and wrote about us, as a people, what he witnessed was that the thing that would be mandated and bureaucratized in Europe is essentially created by a bunch of people who join something. We just do it. It's organic. We come together, we make it happen. And so when I think about people who may want to join a civil association of a certain stripe, like one involved in welfare, it could have some kind of basic welfare. It could have some kind of unemployment insurance function. It could have health insurance functions, anything like that. Death benefits. Someone in your family dies and you need help affording a funeral. They can assist with that. I mean, these are some of the basic things that, where expensive things happen, they're there for you. We're there for each other. You might say we become the social safety net. We weave it together, and we have this in-person connection, this intimacy, the woven threads of what it means for me to look you in the face, you to look in mine, and you say, Max, I will help you, but you're going to have to put down the drink, or what have you. Where you get this human connection, where monies aren't dispensed algorithmically because someone fills out a paper or they satisfy some sort of government means test. It's much more intimate. It's much more about, and it's also about reciprocity. I can give you an opportunity for work, whereas giving you money might be a bad idea. So, hey, and I know so and so is needing help over at thus and so. These kind of intimate connections were completely destroyed in the centralization of welfare and warfare.
Yeah. So what's coming to mind for me is I'm aware, kind of throughout the 1800s and then into the early 1900s, we had versions of, and maybe actually these histories go all the way back. Some of these things are still in existence, but we had like the American Health Association, which or American Medical Association, or the Sociology Association of America, or, it was just groups of people with a shared interest.
Right.
But they came together to help each other with that interest. But then inevitably, I'm guessing, I wasn't there, they got to know each other, like you're saying. And maybe, there was probably some personal exchange too that went beyond the scope of the initial interest, because we're talking about humans and they're getting to know each other. And today, we have things like the Explorers Club, which is, I don't know how much money you have to make to to get into that. Or we have, there are all kinds of, we have the American Bar Association. We have, so they're still here, but they kind of went underground in a way, and they're not accessible to the average person. And,
right.
And they're not really even known, other than maybe people have heard of like a tennis club, obviously, or the Rotary Club. But these things are not actually that different from what we're talking about. It's just so I really love this idea. And this is partly why I sent you Rudolf Steiner's Renewal of the Social Organism. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but I think you're going to love it. Because he talks about creating associations that, and it's like, I'm not great at abstract stuff. So some like mental concepts are hard for me to grasp. So I'm probably going to get this a little wrong, but creating associations that I think are slightly different than what you're talking about, where in his vision, they would, like there might be an association of workers that's not a union, but then there might be an association of managers or somebody, or a group of people overseeing economics, where they say, hey, the world needs this thing made because there aren't enough of them. So we're going to move some of the workers over to this other, whatever, factory or, some job description. And of course they get a say in it. It's not like this probably sounds terrible what I'm saying. Like, it's not just you have to follow these rules, but people opt into it. But workers would be given the same rights as managers, and people would simply be paid according to the needs, I guess, of the society and the amount of money that's available. Anyway, I don't totally get it. He also wrote a book called Associative. No, it's not a World Economy. And I've tried to read that book, and it just goes straight over my head. But this idea of associations is very interesting. And I think what I hear you saying is we could create associations that would then also kind of cross-pollinate ideas or assistance. Like, how would you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine them at many different spheres and scales, and maybe that's what Steiner is driving at. I don't know, but as long as we're not violating basic property rights or someone's bodily autonomy, by conscripting them, then all of these things are possible. It may be that there are some things that are designated public or quasi-public, like a road, where you would want to treat it, there are some things that would be treated like club goods. But at the end of the day, the Mutual Aid Association, the basic idea there of a fraternal organization is people with common interests and common needs come together to support each other in mission. And that's really what I'm going for, not the mutual aid aspect so much. And I tell you why. The reason that these don't exist for this particular sphere is because the government does so much. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So they're crowding out any effort to draw people into a mutual. So the idea is then, okay, how I'm looking at, I'll just put it this way. I want I'm getting together with a group of people, and there's only about 20 of us right now, because it's very early, to create a Freemasons of decentralization. Okay, so the Freemasons had a mutual aid element to them, but they were also had a psycho-spiritual set of practices and a sense of brotherhood. They were a fraternity in the literal sense, is that you felt bonded with other men, and there were initiatic experiences that facilitated this. So if you go back to that consent of the governed idea, that is the fundamental mission, that would be the mission of the organization, is we are going to get as many people as possible involved in a fraternal organization or sororal organization. I like to call it a siblinghood organization, because I want to attract women, obviously, and avail of their talents and avail of their particular contributions. I think that would be a grave mistake in this day and age to take half the world's talent off the table. So, there might be ways within the organization that men and women would self-segregate for certain things, and that's okay. Like, if women want to have some sort of nested subsidiary thing within the organization where they worked on something in particular and they wanted to do it as women because they bring a certain kind of sensibility to the task, I'm all for that personally. Suffice it to say, the thing I'm interested in building is the mission being the consent of the governed, a global organization that supports that mission. And we help each other, and we work together across 7 dimensions: mission, mystery. In other words, we explore life's mysteries, questions about the universe and so on. Mission, morality, meaning, means, like how are we going to do this? Meaning, as in the meaning of life. What are the vectors that confer life meaning? And mastery. How can we become ascended beings, better people through daily continuous practices along certain dimensions? So all of those things in one container is what I've been working on. Before I die, I want to see that exist and outlive me.
It's awesome. It's beautiful. I mean, it's not that different from the mission of this podcast, and maybe it'll morph into something more, but the Human Freedom Project. And I haven't, it doesn't have a container, and it's not something people opt into right now. I played around with that last year, and it's like, I'm not ready. And I don't know if people are, and I need to get this podcast out there. So I have so many questions. So, because my question, and this is maybe the brainstorming part, because something can sound really nice and we can get together and talk about it, but actualizing something is a whole.
You better believe it.
Story.
And I'm a priest archetype, right? And I tend not to be a builder or a sovereign archetype, right? If you like those, I don't know but I think you can pick up intuitively what I'm saying. There are certain people who I need to attract in order to make things happen.
So I am a builder. That's what I'm trying really hard to do. I've built a methodology. I'm now building a school, but I sort of also get the philosophy side of things, and I love talking about things, but I get really frustrated if we're not putting the things we're talking about into action, like now. That's me.
The world needs you, see? And this is another reason why I think it's important to attract women to what I'm working on, is because of that sense that, okay, talk is over. It's time to instantiate. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that there aren't men who are that way, but I think more women are.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think it's baked into us as humans. There's a basic sexual division of labor. This is going to probably get tomatoes thrown at me by your audience, but I'm not saying that women should be in the kitchen. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do think that there are sort of archetype patterns that come out of our evolved millions of years in sex roles that were demanded of us by circumstances, by environmental circumstances. So, let's just say men, take our time machine again, go back and you'll see men were frequently hunting, that sort of thing. Women tended to be gatherers and administrators of camp. And that was their dominion. Whereas the rest of the world was sort of the dominion of the hunters, the scary places, the faraway places, especially with nomadic peoples. So I think there is a degree to which the administration of an organization is often much better wired into women.
This is very fascinating because I think there's people who are willing to actually talk about the differences between masculine and feminine, the sexes. Typically, men are considered builders in the sense that they like to make things and produce things and are out there. Yeah, I mean, typically you're going to find men building houses, not women. Although, there are certainly some women. But we build babies. Like where there's something innate to us that wants to build something and actualize it, like birth it in the world. So that's very interesting to think about. Okay, so coming back to the questions I have about this. So, I could easily see this. Your fraternal organization is called Gray Robes. So I could see Gray Robes getting big for sure and having a lot of people in there talking about these things and maybe defining meaning and discussing means. How are we going to do this? And then my question, of course, is so what? How is this going to have bearing on the world at all? Is it going to have bearing on the lives of the individuals? That's where I say it could for sure have bearing, because it's inherently meaningful to get together with people who share common values or share a common mission. But what I think, if I'm hearing you right, what I think you actually really long for is the actualization of organizations, to use the language we're using today, or associations, that are building different means of economy, economic exchange, money technologies, of adjudication of law, of courts, how to settle conflicts and that kind of thing. So that's what actually really excites me, because I want to talk about what do those courts actually look like? How do we bring them into form and get them going? How do we, when I think about associations or societies, mutual aid societies around money, I immediately think of Obi Nwasku and what he's doing with Fediment. Do you know him? You don't? Mm-mm. Oh, you got to go check him out. I hope to get him on the podcast. But he recorded one with Peter McCormick, What Bitcoin Did. Do you know?
Mm-hmm.
He's recorded 2. Peter McCormack has recorded 2 with Obi. The second one was really good. But this is my layman's terms, very non-Bitcoin expert here. I don't even own any yet. But I love, every time I listen to Obi, I'm like, yes, he's making me want to get involved in Bitcoin. So what he's trying to create are technologies for Bitcoin that are society-based or community-based, where the keys are owned by a community. So each person has a piece of the key and nobody has the whole thing. And so you really have to trust the people, not the technology, per se.
Ooh, interesting.
Very interesting. Yep. And then on this Fedimint software, again, from what I understand, I could create a federation. Let's say I had a bigger company than I do now, and maybe I had 20 employees or something, or contract workers or whatever. We could create a federation that everybody became members of. So it's an organization, but it's completely digital. And then I can pay people in my federation and no one knows about it. It's completely private. And then we can take money out of the federation. It's basically a federation fund until you take out what's yours, but all that data is stored on a technology. That way these transactions are completely private, but people have opted into an organization where, all of those transactions are happening. And then at the end, what it's allowing people to do, for example, in Africa, from what I understand, is they get together. Farmers have created an association or a federation, and they're buying things that they need to farm at a much cheaper price because they're going in on a huge wholesale order together, and then they're distributing it amongst themselves. It's just really cool. Those kinds of things, I'm like, yes, okay. Because I know I'm for sure not building those kinds of things. So I love hearing about other people. So you should definitely check that out.
So yeah, this is a tough thing for me, right? There's a sense in which, and Alexander Bard is one of the original Grey Robes. He's a friend of mine, and he's a crazy Swedish guy, but he is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he says he has a bit of wisdom about this. He says there's an extent to which you have to be the priest and let the chiefs be the chiefs. Now, the chiefs should come to church on Sunday, if you like, or come to the temple. But your job is to nourish them spiritually, okay? Somewhere along the way, Satoshi Nakamoto got spiritual nourishment. This is a thing that I sometimes point out to people, and they go, "What?" Because the Bitcoin white paper would seem as if it is just dry as dust technical specs. But that document is oozing with a political philosophy, with a sense of mission, with a sense of morality. It is saying, how dare you? Satoshi Nakamoto got spiritual nourishment from somewhere. He got the morality piece. Okay? So there might be 2,000 Ethereum developers out there who are really good technically, who know how to build dApps, okay? But they haven't gotten any spiritual nourishment. So they're going to busy themselves dicking around with NFTs. Who cares? Now, there's an extent to which we say, oh, but you might be able to use NFTs in interesting ways that push the movement for self-government forward. Or, and that's great. That may be true. But what I'm saying is you're more likely to get that if you have a siblinghood of people who are constantly steeped in this sense of mission, and then in the moral practices, which we call the virtues. If they are not so steeped in this, if they don't feel this kindredness, this bond, this every second thought when they leave about that comes back to the mission, then they're gonna be captured. They're gonna be bought and sold by the Microsofts of the world, the Facebooks, the Googles, the which are just proxy governments anymore. They're certainly not. I don't think they're a net good anymore. I used to think they were, but I don't think they are. And I do my very best to not use Google in any way I possibly can. Even though I still use Gmail, I'm starting to wonder how I can extricate myself from that. I don't use Google search anymore. Anyway, off on a tangent. The point is,
worthless.
It's like, the reason I'm thinking along those lines is because I'm steeped in something that is more than about money, trinkets, tokens, Lambos, mooning, all that crap.
This might seem like a tangent, but I feel that this is why I created this podcast. So my philosophy is that freedom is always an individual journey, or at least right now it is, but it's also happening to all of us, whether we're aware of it or not. I believe we're evolving towards becoming truly free beings, but we're not there yet, from a psycho-spiritual perspective. And so our curriculum on that evolutionary journey is individual, but then also collective. And there are all these constraints that show up to block our path. Why? Because we're like little children who just want what we want when we want it, and when we don't get it immediately, we throw a tantrum. But that's not a free being. So we have to actually be tested. We have to go through trials. There actually have to be tragedies and malevolence. And I do believe in evil. And I believe it's a necessary element of this thing we call the human experiment, because without evil, there's no good. Without pain, there's no wisdom. So it's the paradox of opposites. And then, of course, the middle way is what happens as we, swing the pendulum back and forth, and then develop freedom. So what you're talking about, the reason I brought this up, is the development, I think, of each individual being inspired to aim at that mission. It's like, that's what I really hear you saying is how can we aim at the mission of freedom for all human beings? But it's a very specific kind of freedom that you're describing. It's a freedom that is imbued with morality, reciprocity, collaboration, resource sharing, respect for each other. I don't know what else you would add. And so each person on that journey is going to have slightly different obstacles. So this podcast, I'm framing it as there are 5 primary obstacles or constraints, which is the body, relationships and social life, money and economics, law, and the state and law, we could say, because what do we do if there's no state? And then environments, so cosmic, and then planetary and human created. And all of these are it's part of our curriculum. And when I first emailed you, I said, I want to help you with your mission of spawning 1,000 Satoshis. Because I definitely, ever since I first listened to that first podcast with you and Robert Breedlove, and I've listened to others, and I, of course, I'm reading your Substack, it's almost like I want to pull out the philosophy that you have, because I think it's so rich, it's so deep, and then try to drill down on the practicals. Like, okay, how do we create something out of this mission that could serve as a better organization than the state, for example.
Well, exactly. And there's no reason why projects like that couldn't be spawned in such an organization, particularly when it scales and all of a sudden you have 2,000, 20,000, 200,000 people involved. That's really, and you're what you're building, it's the same thing, right? Once you start getting people together, I just know that in the division of labor, in specialization, my job is to be a steward of the priesthood, for lack of a better way of putting it. Or the Freemasons have masters and wardens within each lodge. And the master is responsible for the content, the philosophical, intellectual content, and so on. And the warden is responsible for administration. Now, who works on the rituals and all that stuff? Probably a little of both, but I don't know because I'm not a Freemason. That being said, I can imagine that, as we grow, we're going to have to think along those lines. And some things are going to be done offline. So once we nourish our spirits, once we're reminded cyclically, because time moves in a loop and a line in this framework. So what comes around cyclically? We're going to have 4 seasons. What can we celebrate in each season? Some things come around monthly, right? So there'll be 12 of them that, one of each thing each month that you get to explore. And that loops, because you need a constant revisiting, just like the Passover Seder, right? For the Israelites, or around wherever they are in the world, next year in Jerusalem, the Seder table is this kind of looping concept of time. But then you have the linear time too. You have to make stuff happen, and that's where you're headed with it. And look, being together, part of the thing I'm trying to communicate in this too, which is really hard, is that this is not going to be easy. The project of liberation is not going to be easy. When the Israelites, going back to them again, I just brought up this Passover, when the Israelites left the bosom of Egypt, it was a cradle of civilization with lots of plenty. Even though they were in captivity and used as slaves, they were fed. When they got out in the desert, they had to rely on Yahweh, I guess, to provide manna. And but they were close to starving. So they started belly aching and they became uncomfortable. Freedom is hard. That's why I like the Israelites. We've got to do this together.
Yep.
We are throwing off a massive set of powers that they're going to buckle under their own weight, and we have to be prepared to seize that moment. But part of that is first obliging people to awaken to this. Like you and I are 4 steps ahead of most people. Like part of being, and I wrote about this today in my Substack, you have to be part monk, part missionary. And in being a missionary, you have to explain to people the gravity of the problem. Why it's worth giving up their security, their comfort, their amusements, their empty lives, that they're not fulfilling, they're just numb. And this is why everybody's so depressed and everything, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got to feel pain again. Like you said, you're a pain expert. There is no
pain advocate.
Yeah, but there's no pleasure without that pain. There's no sublimity without the seeking and the striving.
No meaning. That's really it.
Right. No meaning without it. So that there is a dialectic there that we have to acknowledge and harness. And it's not to say that in our mutuality, in our togetherness as a siblinghood, we won't help each other through it. And we will mute mute some of that pain and some of those burdens. But we will learn to do it with each other. And that will be hard, and we'll have to relearn certain aspects of being human again, to be communitarian. But we will have to be communitarian, and that's so precious. And I think that people are going to wake up. I think while it might be kind of inconvenient or bodily painful in some ways, I think spiritually people are going to come alive when they see what this means, when you come together and lock arms in solidarity around a mission and you work your ass off for it.
Okay, what is the mission?
The consent of the governed.
Can we define that for people? Because I have a feeling most people won't know what that means. Like, again, just kind of imaginative pictures. What does that mean in society? What does that mean for our lives?
That means at some sphere and scale that we do not currently enjoy, that we move asymptotically toward the condition where we are governed by rules and not rulers. We are not constantly manipulated, controlled, and threatened with violence through the unholy alliance of state and corporation. We are not surveilled. We are not nudged. We are not controlled. We're not obliged to give, 30 to 60% of our income to wars we shouldn't be involved in, playing global constable in a time that does not justify it. We to prop up a new aristocracy that does not deserve our patronage, forced patronage, that, essentially to get out from under the thumb of this authoritarian elite that has been with us our entire lives, but is becoming more formidable, even as we as a country, so to speak, are going broke.
Yeah. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna try to put that frame it like in a positive, because, and this, I think, is like the constant temptation, and I have to correct myself too sometimes, but like, for example, when I'm working with people in pain, most people in pain just want their pain gone. But you can't just get rid of something. You have to either exit and build, which is a replacement, right? Or transform it. And so how I imagine that in the positive is like, children are attending schools that are, and this isn't in the negative, but then I'll frame it in the positive, not regulated by the state in any way whatsoever. They are, schools are probably administered through associations, by associations of teachers, associations of parents, things like that. And where they're coming together to decide what's going to serve our children best. What is going to serve our communities best? These children are going to grow up to become society. And then from that perspective, if children are actually growing up through schools and in communities where their individual talents and gifts are being nurtured instead of, standardized testing and everybody's equal, which literally makes, it's just like moderation is killing us, literally, and it's killing our spirit. Then we grow up into adults where we get to pursue what inspires us to learn and what we actually want to put our time and effort into. I believe there's going to be a resurgence of apprenticeship as people seek out somebody doing something they want to do. And so, higher education is going to look also very different than it looks right now. So I imagine, for example, like I have been in a profession that is typically regulated by the state. But in 2011, I threw my license in the toilet and said, I'm done with that shit. I'm going to self-determine. I'm going to, figure out. And the reason was I wanted to be able to address the whole human being instead of just the body. And we're currently in a system right now, and it is a system. It's top down. You follow it's the ruler telling us what to do. If you work with bodies, you can't work with a psyche. If you work with a psyche, you can't work with the body. You certainly can't touch your clients, let alone acknowledge them if you see them in the grocery store, which is crazy. It's so not what you and I are talking about here, like intimacy, getting to know each other, community-based. And so I envision associations of various practitioners in fields, maybe lawyers that aren't lawyers as we know them today, but maybe associations of people fascinated by law and morality, and associations of people fascinated by the human organism or the human psyche, and people fascinated as you are by maybe philosophy and spirituality and that priesthood and mystery. And so we can all gravitate to the things that we want to gravitate to as far as higher education goes, but there's no one telling anyone what to do. There's no licensure anymore. There's no certifications even, because as I'm a teacher of a methodology, but I don't certify anyone because I don't want to be the tyrant. I don't want to be the ruler. I don't want to tell people what to do. Practically speaking, as a builder, someone who thinks very practically, I think we're going to need these specific associations that in order to pull this off. It can't be, kind of centralized or coming from one particular place. Like, we're going to need an association of people studying law to figure out how to build something, an organization that is not the government that we have today. And then other people figuring out, okay, how do we build hospitals that like actually care for people instead of drugging them the minute they get there, shining lights on them all throughout the night, waking them up every 10 minutes so they can't get sleep. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop my rant now. Yeah. So I love your vision, and I love the role you're playing. And I'm like, okay, let's find the people and get to work building these things. If we can build these associations, and as you're talking about, okay, ask ourselves means, how do we do this? How do we do this? Then we can actually start getting somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the thing, I know that, so I have it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of putting it, but the gray robes have what we refer to as dogma. Okay. Doesn't mean we're dogmatic. In fact, we have part of the idea of the mystery vector is, or the mystery dimension is, that you're constantly asking questions. You're constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in your thinking and staying open-minded. But that is part of the province of what you might call fast flux. There are some things that you want. Everything changes. Everything is undergoing a process of becoming. So there's nothing that is absolutely timeless, written in stone, period, paragraph. There's always going to be some contingency that changes things, even if but for a second. But with dogma, you're trying to slow down the flux. There are certain things that we're settling on that are central to our organization, that serve as a center of gravity so that people can come together in solidarity around that and orbit it. So what does that look like? How do people learn it? It is a doctrine. So it is a dogma. It is a doctrine. The more that doctrine gets tested, the more it becomes dogma. So it's dialogue, doctrine, dogma, in that order. And I want to develop the doctrine. I know that I've got to develop the doctrine. Otherwise, what are you signing up for? Okay, you said your mission is the consent of the governed. What does that look like? Well, I don't know exactly what it looks like. We are going to build it, but all I know is we want to live in a condition where we have rules, but we're not ruled. That was the Jeffersonian vision. So, in my role as a hierophant, I guess you could say, or I don't know what to call it. There are all these kind of funny terms that sit uncomfortably with me, but I'm going to just have to step into it. I have to provide that. I have to provide the inspiration. I have to provide the spiritual nourishment that we talked about, the morality, the mission, the mystery, the meaning, dimensions of things. And then, but all the while, when discussion of means, it's like, okay, but I think last time maybe we talked about the threefold mandate of subversive innovation. Did we talk about that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You might have to. I don't think so, though.
Well, let me go over it again. If I didn't talk about it, it'll be fresh and new. But the idea of subversive innovation is politics is a kind of a dead letter. You can go, cry your teardrop in the ocean kind of stuff. Fine. You can go, picket and all that stuff, but it's pretty useless. The world is run by special interests, and your vote doesn't count. I'm sorry. If anybody tells you otherwise, it's because it was in an after-school special. Okay, you learned it from the people who want you to believe that, and they're called the powerful, and they're the ones we're at odds with. But subversive innovation is like, let's build new systems. You said earlier that you were comfortable with the idea of systems and living systems, and I said let's design new protocols. So we might be talking about legal innovation. We might be talking about technological innovation. We might be talking about a hybrid of these. Bitcoin is, in a manner of speaking, a hybrid of institutional innovations and technological innovation, right? The way we orient ourselves to other people in the Bitcoin network is an institutional change relative to fiat money. We know that. So let's use Bitcoin as an exemplar. The threefold mandate of subversive innovation being that kind of innovation that is going to dilute the power and the aspirations of the powerful, okay, is first we want to lower transaction and cooperation costs. In other words, lower the cost of you and I doing things on our own without the intercession of third parties, or limiting the intercession of third parties, whether that's transaction or cooperation. Two,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just I want to take people with us. And I have a feeling, certainly in my audience, but I think just generally people interested may not know what that means or why it matters.
That's it's sort of like a kind of a bloodless economics term. But I build this in because I know I want part of the gray robes to be 1,000 Satoshis, right? But I also know that there might be 1,000 moms. So we'll come back to that. But the 1,000 Satoshis that we want to unleash on the world, the idea that whatever you're good at technology, you're good at software development. Is your software development being informed by the idea that you're going to make it easier for people to interact? Because really what we're talking about here in the consent of the governed is lateralizing relationships. The idea of government authority is that there is some justification for third parties to intercede in the affairs of people whose relationships ought otherwise to be lateralized. You and I want to create a school for our kids together. That's nobody's business. In fact, we are going to be better at creating a school in cooperation with each other for our kids than anybody else, than any public institution or bureaucracy, anybody to which we're obliged to outsource our responsibilities. Those distant capitals staffed with bureaucrats are not going to be able to tend to the needs of our kids in the way that we want, which is going to be bespoke, individualized, and much more loving. That's the kind of thing that when we're developing technologies, we want to make those kind of lateral relationships possible and reduce the cost of those relationships forming, just like de Tocqueville talked about with these civil associations. So that's really what I'm talking about there. And it sounds kind of boring and bloodless to talk about reducing the costs of transactions, but it's really kind of fundamental to what we're talking about. We want to make it easier. We want to lubricate interaction of people and communities rather than having to get permission from all these third parties, or having someone taking a cut before we do something, or having someone put a rubber stamp on something.
Yeah, so this is something that I think very few people outside of the Bitcoin space understand, or certain sectors of the economics actually understand about how economics work today.
Yeah.
So the bank, you have a bank account, they're a third party. Then you also have Visa if you have a debit card, and that's a third party, a fourth party.
Yeah, there's just layers of people who are yoink, 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 and getting involved in your stuff.
Yeah, and then you have PayPal, where you also use your Visa debit card, and now we have a fifth party or whatever. I mean, and it's part of, I guess, our evolution. I don't know how humanity could have evolved any other way in some ways than it did, although I certainly think we could have done way better at the start of the 1900s. But most people, I don't think, understand, this is where I think people get hung up, because they're like, well, what do you mean? I don't have a bank account and I don't have a debit card and I don't, and this is where I think why people are so passionate about Bitcoin. But these are the uncomfortable things we're going to have to figure out how to live without, as you were talking about, if we're going to actually build a different organism to live inside of and contribute to.
Exactly. And I'm bad about it.
Yeah.
I'm bad to, I'm a path of least resistance kind of guy. I like my creature comforts. I don't want to have to futz with things. Like right now, I've got to get into a wallet, a token wallet. And I know I'm going to have to, I got to get out all the seed phrases and go through that whole process and reactivate. It's just like, it's a hassle, right? Which you don't get with your Visa card.
Nope.
The Visa card comes with all manner of other things that are waiting in the invisible spaces. And we're getting to a point where, where governments of the world they're shrinking the number of banks so that they can begin to have financial panopticon over us, where every transaction is going to be tracked. They can freeze our bank accounts. If we go to central bank digital currencies, we're toast. The surveillance state plus a central bank digital currency, we are toast. We will be living on someone else's plantation. And that's just all there is to it.
Yeah. Because, it'd be one thing to just have it be a simple transaction cost, and the only cost was economic, but it's not.
No, not at all. That's right.
Real quick, and then I want to have you define the other two mandates of subversive innovation, and then I know we'll probably have to close this one. But did you listen to Natalie Smolensky's speech at the Bitcoin Policy Summit?
No, but I've heard her before. She's great.
I hope to talk to her. Yeah, it was wonderful. You should listen to it. It's only 12 minutes, but she brought up something that I didn't even know about this, and I'm not certainly like the most learned person, but I try to learn about these things. And I'm going to probably butcher this. It was some kind of banking. Of course, it was called Banking Transparency Act or something like that, or something back in the 70s or 80s. That basically passed a law in the United States that said, if you give your information, your personal private information, to a third party, you lose all your rights. Basically, like, it is theirs to do with what they want. You have no rights over it. You basically belong to them. The state can govern it. And so that goes for your telephone company, your, certainly Facebook, certainly probably Gmail to Google to an extent, And then, of course, banks. And now we've got FISA going on right now. So, yeah. All right. So what are the other two?
So there is raise predation and parasitism costs. Does your technology, your system, whatever you're offering, raise the costs for others to sponge off of you, to use you as prey, or what have you?
Can you give examples of that?
Well, I always just go back to Bitcoin because it's very much an apex predator and an exemplar of subversive innovation. Now, someone would argue that they're not reducing transaction costs because they have high transaction fees because of the small blocks and all that stuff. But we're talking about it in the grand scheme of things, moving resources around the world without the intercession of third parties safely, securely, anonymously, that sort of stuff, relatively anonymously. Bitcoin is still the apex predator of the space. And relative to this layered, government oversight panopticon, it's a lot years ahead. And they're coming up with technologies that allow you to anonymize transactions and a wallet anonymizers and things like that, mixers. So I'm very hopeful about that. In any case, the idea is, as you're innovating, are you thinking about how to raise predation cost? How do you keep... And I'm not just talking about governments. I'm talking about criminals too. Criminals and others who want to take advantage. We can't have that. So it might be something as simple as a system that you hook on the outside of your house that has a bunch of little cameras that allows, you to see who's coming on and off the property. Right? Like the ring cameras at your, now do that. That would have been an innovation that makes it less likely that people are going to take packages off your porch. Something as simple as that. Or something that's some technology that's on your car that as soon as someone comes near your car, there's all of a sudden they're recorded in the act of doing whatever they're about to do to break into your car, and that whatever the case, I'm trying to do the innovation on the spot, but just to paint a picture. And the third one is you want to reduce switching costs, or you want to create an exit, right? So you want to make it lower the costs of moving from one system to another, or the cost of at least leaving the bad system, but also entering the good system. So a lot of people are like, well, I have all my pictures and all my phone numbers and all my contacts in my iPhone. I don't want to go to a Droid or the reverse, right? And it's like, okay, if there was a simple mechanism to port all this stuff over, would you do it? And they'd be like, yeah, maybe it's just that. Or maybe it's something as simple as, if there are more jurisdictions in the world for people to migrate to that are safe havens for human freedom, that in a manner of speaking creates options that lowers the switching costs of staying in your jurisdiction under whatever horrible thumb. I mean, this is why I'm always really, really torn on the immigration issue. On the one hand, I understand that it's too much right now. There's just too many people, and you don't know who they are. They're coming into the country, and this is all for specifically for the partisan aspirations, right? The aspirations of one party to gain permanent control, and to do it behind this lie of caring about immigrants. But on the other hand, I actually do really care about immigrants and people who come from countries that are governed poorly, that are impoverished, and they're looking for a better life. That could be me. So that could be my family. So it's a really tough thing, but lowering the costs of exit is a way of describing how do we allow people to move between and among systems so that it's easy for shitty systems to collapse. So this is the frameworks that I'm trying to develop as part of a gray robe's way of thinking. So it's not just, let's go out here and let's just go ahead and start building stuff, right? Mm-hmm. There needs to be a set of frameworks, psycho-spiritual development, morality, mission, all that good stuff that we enumerated. That needs to be fully fleshed out so they constantly are able to nourish themselves from these things. And I and other priests like me can provide that. But then they go back out into the world equipped with this way of thinking, and they go be the next Satoshi. They are the next Travis Kalanick, or they're the next, you have it, you name it, Marie Curie, whatever.
Yeah. So what I take from that is like, if someone heard you say this or was part of Grey Robes, and they maybe also had engineering skills or some other skills, and maybe they come up with, I mean, actually, I think it could be a lot of things. Like, I could imagine companies starting that aren't necessarily technology based. They are there to assist people in transitioning, let's say, right? Like, yeah. Because I would sign up for that right now, in a way, if that existed, because it's like, oh my God, I have to learn a whole new language. It's called Bitcoin. I have no idea how to speak this language. I've listened to like hundreds of hours of podcasts. I still don't get it. But if someone, and I think that, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name, but I did listen to somebody on a podcast and I think he created something like it. You can call and schedule a 30-minute consultation and learn about Bitcoin for free. But then if you want to hire them, they'll help you transition. It's like, they'll help you buy your first Bitcoin or whatever. Like, that's what I need. So it's things like that, I imagine. Or for example, right now I'm okay saying this publicly. I'm done participating in the taxation system. I have no idea yet exactly how I'm going to build a new organism for myself, or like operate my life in a lawful manner and in an economic manner, but I'm determined to figure it out. But as far as I know right now, and I've been looking and I grew up with a lot of this knowledge, so it's not new to me, there's no one way to do it. And there are all kinds of opinions and some of them will get you in trouble. Some of these people out there, they're like false prophets, and they're profiting greatly off of people's desire for a quick and easy transition. So I think that's why what you're doing is so important, and view it with a sense of mission and morality. So yeah, I love it. I love your mission. And I think those three mandates of subversive innovation it's helpful to have a context, a framework, a constraint to work with, because then you have something to jump off of. So is there anything you'd like to maybe end this conversation with, or anything that
only that I'm under no illusions though about, as we grow beyond the couple handfuls of people we have, we're going to need people who do stuff. The Freemasons have the wardens, not just the masters. And there are different degrees of master. That's all great. That's what I'm cut out for. But I need doers. The organization needs doers. It cannot function as a priesthood alone. And so there will be people who are members whose participation, and they get spiritual rewards from being efficacious and helping out the order in ways that I can't, or ways that other priest or wizard types can't. There are going to be people who want to set up the weekly events and make sure everybody knows what time things happen, and that kind of stuff that does my head in, frankly. It's like, yes, make it so. Like
I hear you on that one. That's not my strength.
I ran an annual event with a guy. Both of us were creatives, and that was just a terrible, toxic combination. We fought like brothers, and we loved each other, but like brothers who like we wanted to, sometimes.
Yeah.
When what we needed in the other was there's this book, Rocket Fuel. There's the visionary and the executive, the visionary and the implementer. Ideally, you have three. Rocket Fuel is the metaphor for that book, but ideally, you have three: the head, heart, and the gut, or the visionary thinker, the relational marketing, human contact kind of people person, and the third is the executive, the get shit done person. And I really want to partner with a get shit done person. That's what I know has to come next at the highest echelons of this organization. Even though I want it to be a self-managed organization with good protocols and not like a conventional hierarchy. If it needs to start off as a conventional hierarchy, just so that we can get stuff done, that's okay. And I'm curious, perhaps the next time we talk, to hear about how you deal with that, if you have that same dynamic. And if you want to speak to that for a minute now, I'm in a similar conundrum. I am a builder. Like I'm very practical. I feel very frustrated if I'm not seeing results, like something tangibly happening or changing. So that is in my nature, but technology is not, and organization is not. Like I'm like like I can build on my own, and there's that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I'm a fast person. So I have a tendency then to isolate and do it all myself because I can go fast. Me too.
But then I'm not going far because I don't have people with me. So yeah, I'm in a similar conundrum. It does sound like we're different, but yeah. Well, since we're talking about gray robes, right? I know you got to go, but do you want to share really quick, just a little bit for anyone listening, if they are intrigued and they want to learn more, where they can learn more about that and get involved if they would like to?
Yeah, I think the home for the gray robes right now in terms of contact is just to go to the underthrow.org Substack, just underthrow.org. And in the nav bar is a link called the Gray Robes. If you are a $5 a month subscriber, or I think it's like $50 a year, something like that, you can get the Gray Robes content. So you can start to see what we're about. You can start to build out some of those 7 dimensions that we talked about. And then if you're interested, there's a way to go deeper, and then, reach out to me and we can start talking about maybe this is something that you want to try to do to start, because then, and I'm going to shamelessly, we're going to rip off the Freemasons, that every node in the network is going to start with a master and a warden, because that's your visionary and executive, right? That's your content person and your get stuff done person. So I'm gonna mimic that, a la that Rocket Fuel book. And so if you find, but the best place to start is just with the Gray Robes content. If it resonates, if you feel like, yes, this is satisfying a certain kind of need that I've been having, this is inspiring me to do something back in the world, I want to help, I want to get involved, I want to hear from you. And that's underthrow.org, the Gray Robes in the nav bar.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to do this again, Max. I know we kind of talked about maybe doing a series, and it's not exactly progressive and structured, which is probably characteristic of your personality and my personality. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope to do it again soon. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure.